By the time you finish this video, there will have been between 12 to 15 divorces in the United States filed. At least 4 of those will be someone over 50. There are 3 divorces every 2 minutes in the United States. Don't let your relationship become one of those statistics. Hello, my name is Alec Capel, and I have over a decade of experience working with over 100 millionaires throughout their retirement and transitions into retirement. And I am now pursuing a career as a marriage and family therapist, hopefully in order to assist people who deal with many of the same issues around finance and relationships that I ran across during my time as a financial advisor. Second marriages late in life already come with many challenges, from histories around relationships, physical relationships, grown kids, perhaps the trauma of a bad divorce or a traumatic death that led you to a second marriage, and of course, the subject of this video, finances. Retirees are divorcing more than ever. According to a study by Brown and Lynn done in 2022, the divorce rate for couples aged 50 and older increased from 8.7% in 1990 to 36% of all divorces in 2019. So 8.7% of all divorces in 1990 were people over 50. It is now 36% of all divorces. To put that in numbers, that is from 206,007 divorces all the way up to 710,815 divorces in 2019. So it's a huge number. It's a huge increase. So there's a lot of statistics out there showing that people who are going into retirement, especially over 50 years old, are divorcing more often or going into, second and third marriages because of that. That's something that I have a lot of anecdotal experience with as well. I noticed that during my time as a financial advisor, and sure enough, the statistics line up. Funny enough, race, education, and income had some impact, but they were relatively modest, and so that wasn't really a big factor. It was fairly even across all of these categories, and so pretty well everybody's at risk of this. Now, the divorce rate for second marriages was almost double that of couples who were still in their first marriage. So if you're going into a second marriage over the age of 50, then you are highly at risk for having a second divorce. Now, Brown and Lynn also conducted a study to determine that people who have a second divorce, or even within the first divorce, have a decline in their living standard. Significant decline. For women, they experience a 45% decline in living standard. This is massive. It's nearly half of your living standard. Imagine going from, living in a 2,000 square foot house to a 1,000 square foot house, being able to buy $1,000 worth of groceries to $500 worth of groceries every month. I mean, that's an incredible change. For men, it's a little less, 21%. However, the study did show if women remarry again, this gap was nearly totally closed for them, but that puts some dependence on them, being pushed into a second, third, or fourth marriage, which is really not ideal. So what do you do to prevent this from happening? And really, what are the biggest contributing factors to this? Well, the biggest contributing factors from the studies that are out there now are that for second, third, fourth marriages, etc., debt is one of the biggest contributing factors to divorce. One partner coming into the relationship with an inordinate level of debt can create financial and therefore emotional strain on both partners. It's also an issue if one partner tends to gather debt quickly, and so that also puts a lot of strain on the relationship and breaks trust in many instances. Another one of the large items is financial fidelity. We think that fidelity is usually a term we use for, sexual relationships, right? You're going to be an infidelity is, having a relationship with another person. But financial fidelity is also a concept that's becoming more and more popular now where we have hidden spending from one of the partners, and that is a massive breach of trust. It's of course financially irresponsible and dangerous. And as stated earlier, women particularly experiencing a 45% decline in their living standard, it's scary. It's scary to think that your partner is ruining your financial future. Even if they can recover a little bit better, or it won't affect them as much, it could affect you as a woman much more. The other item is who's in charge. This is something that Dave Ramsey's very famous for kind of touting the line. If one of you is the money nerd, you're the one that needs to be in charge. You're the one that needs to do all of the finances. Now, to some degree, I sort of agree with that, but with some caveats. I have seen a lot of people who were in their second and third marriages because of, circumstances in life and all of that and age. One of the defining factors that I was able to see with that relationship model is that most people going into a second marriage, and especially a third marriage, both of them have been in charge of their own funds for a while now. And so you want to be able to consolidate those two leadership roles in some sort of manageable way. So as Dave Ramsey would say, there's often the one who's the controller and one who is the, I guess you could call it the spender. So we'll take a look at consolidating those roles a little bit further in the video. The fourth and final item is financial standards. You have to have the conversation of who gets what when we die. What do we want to spend our money on? Kids, inheritance especially, or gifting to kids. Who's going to get what? How do we make this work? Because one of you may have come from a very poor background. One of you may have come from a very wealthy background. And that really throws off the priority of where that money needs to go and what's important to do with that money. And this is something I've run into time and time again, is you have, let's just say you've done very well for yourself. You have $3 or $4 million saved up for retirement. Each of you are coming into this marriage with, roughly half of that, let's just say. And you are deciding, hey, we want to buy a vacation home, but one of you is not the kind of person that would buy a vacation home. So you're trying to figure out, well, how do we spend that money? Who pays for what amount? What happens if we die and this vacation home is in our, names, and now we need to be able to split it between my 3 kids and your 1 kid. How do we make that work? And so those are huge things that you need to figure out as far as financial standards go. So these are all major questions that you really should be asking before you go to the courthouse. So how do you deal with those issues? What should you be doing to understand those big problems before you go and get into a second or third marriage? Well, for the debt, you need to understand some items of how it will be paid. And that is the simplest version with debt is debt has to be paid for, and you need to know how that's going to be paid for. One of the contributing factors to divorce around debt has to do with the gender earnings gap, especially for people who are over the age of 50, because traditionally earnings for women were lower during the time that many people that age were starting work. And that really affects the feelings, especially according to a study done by Kruger et al. In 2024, very recently. That really affects the feelings that women have, particularly about spending and kind of the right to their money. And if you're going into a second marriage, that's a very true feeling, right? It's your money and you have a right to your money. And so if somebody comes into a marriage with a lot of debt, you don't want to use your money to pay their debt. And this is also very difficult if you're accruing new debt in a marriage. One of the techniques that I've seen for this that was fairly effective for people who were accruing new debt, like we talked about with the vacation home, is that the person who has the either less assets to be able to draw from or less debt in general will pay back the debt accrued by the person with higher assets upon death. Their estate will pay it back. Now, this can be a difficult thing. Everybody has to work this out in their own way, right? You could also pay equivalent to the amount of assets you have. So if that's a 30-70, one person pays 70% of it, the other person pays 30% of it. And that's a fairly equitable way to go about dealing with new debt. Now, old debt, that's something that when I've dealt with that before, most people pretty well say, look, your debt was your debt. You accrued it before we met and married, and you need to handle that. Financial accountability is how we deal with financial infidelity. A budget is the most powerful tool for financial accountability. And being transparent is really the only way around having any of that money being hidden. The people I've seen who do this well have monthly or quarterly meetings, even up to just annual meetings about money to ensure that the budget's being adhered to. Now, of course, a budget can be built in many different ways. One of the most effective ways I have seen for people who do not want to combine their money in a second or third marriage is that they have his budget, her budget, and then there is the household budget down the middle. And that budget down the middle is what pays for all of the items that are important. Everything from life insurance to the house to the gas bill to vacation and gift funds for family members. Everything that needs to be something that you would both want to do. And then outside of that, if each of you has some money that you want to be able to go and spend on your toy cars or hobbies or whatever that you don't need or want the other person to necessarily know how much you're spending, that is up to you. And the transparency in the budget makes sure that the accountability for your ability to come in and continually pay for your portion of that household budget is sustainable. That's where the annual meeting comes in, or the quarterly or monthly meeting. It's basically to come in and say, yes, you still have enough assets to be able to pay for that household budget. And yes, technically, do you have more assets and could pay for more of that if necessary? Yes, but the agreement is that's the rest of the money. That's all of your fun money that the other partner doesn't need to know about. And that's worked really well for a lot of people. Now, of course, if you're wanting to combine your finances, the transparency tends to be there with that already, and the budget is a really great way of making sure that you can agree upon all of the different items within that combined budget anyway. Agreeing on leadership is also a huge step in all of this. You have to really have the conversation to say, look, do I want to be the de facto person? Do you want to be the money nerd or the controller in this relationship? Now, with people who have the experience of controlling their own money and their own assets coming into a second marriage, what I have seen is that many times what they do is they will sit down and they will find their strengths and weaknesses, right? So one person comes in and they're really strong with investments. And the other person comes in and they're very strong with insurance and other items like that. And they'll say, okay, look, you handle all of our insurance issues and I'll handle all of our investments. Even if we keep these accounts separate, I'll go in and pick all the investment structures. And that has worked well. So you don't have to think of it as I'm only going to take care of my stuff, or you only take care of your stuff and that's okay, or I'm going to take care of all of our stuff. You can kind of layer it in a different way where you've got, mine and yours, but I'm going to take care of all of the insurance across both, and you take care of all the investments across both. And then when it comes to family gifting, I take care of mine and you take care of yours. And so it's a really interesting technique that I think works well for most people. And of course, finally, you have to clarify your standards. You have to sit down and have the serious conversation, the hard conversation. And oftentimes, this is where I suggest getting a financial planner involved, because you want to be able to have someone look at all of the stuff that you have and ask you some pretty serious questions about, well, what are you going to do if you die? Who's getting what here? Are you gifting money to kids? Are you going to sell a property? What if you have rental properties? Who gets those? How do those get handled? Are they going to be inherited? Are they going to be sold? Do you have a business? What happens with all of that? And what's important for you and to you to happen to those when something big happens. Who's going to pay for what if you're looking at a vacation home? I've run into that before. People want to buy vacation homes. They want to buy a second home somewhere nice. And they just didn't think about who was paying for what portion of it. And when that question is genuinely asked to them, they start having a little bit of a argument about, well, who's got what assets paying for what items. And so you need to have those conversations before you sit down and get married. So hopefully this has helped you with some of the bigger items that come into the risk of divorce for second marriages that I have seen the most with people that I have worked with over the years, and what has contributed to late life divorces. If you found this helpful, please leave a comment below. Give me your opinion on it or your experience. I'd be interested in hearing about that. And if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe. Thanks.